Morning, everybody. Before I begin, I would like to publicly acknowledge and congratulate our host for receiving the prestigious AHRC grant to begin what I think all of us hope will be one of many such workshops dealing with cinema and other disciplines, not necessarily philosophy, but hopefully keeping Daoism as part of the discourse. So I have an excuse to come back to London every year and make new friends and see old friends. To be honest with you, I have published papers on sculpture, painting, and other things related to aesthetics, but I've never given serious thought to cinema and how Daoist thought can engage cinema studies in a meaningful way. So I'm very grateful to be here, to have the privilege of being the first speaker of this workshop, and hopefully what I say in the next 35 minutes or 40 minutes will prove interesting, thought-provoking, and encourage you to investigate and read more about Daoist thoughts, not necessarily my own work, but the work of my peers in Daoist thoughts, and the result being that you can apply that to your own writing in whatever form, or your own discussions in whatever form they may take. So as this is the first workshop, and as this is really my first engagement, rather serious engagement with cinema and Daoist philosophy, the title is a bit provocative. It was more provocative than this, but I toned it down a little bit because I don't want to be booed out of the room. It's okay? Yeah. So, do cinematic images exist in the world? I think from this title alone you can get a feeling for what my answer will be. Yes or no, right? A Daoist response. So this is a very philosophical provocation. And for me, as somebody who does philosophy, it's not enough to simply think abstractly. Being a scholar of Chinese philosophy, philosophy needs to be applicable. You need to be able to use it in your daily life. Otherwise, it's just abstract thought, and it has no bearing on how we as human beings can prosper and flourish and engage with others in a multicultural, multidisciplinary kind of discourse. So without further ado, I will just stick to the PPT, otherwise I will talk for hours. Right, so to begin, we have to start at the very beginning of the Chinese philosophical or intellectual tradition. And to begin speaking about images, there's one text in particular that draws our attention, which is the Book of Changes. In Chinese, I will keep the Chinese to bare minimum. And for those of you who do not speak the language or do not have background, but I Ching in Chinese. This text was formulated as a text of divination to predict future events, but not necessarily to predict the outcome of future events, rather to predict the changes of current events as they may or may not unfold in the future. It was a text that was originally formulated in the 12th century BC, so in the very beginning of the Zhou dynasty in China, so this is the mid-1100s BC. And over the centuries, it was expanded and elaborated upon. Commentaries were appended to it, so interpretive essays and what have you. And when we reached the time of 3rd century Common Era, a very young, somewhat brash individual whose name is Wang Di, a very famous commentator to both the Tao Te Ching as well as to the I Ching. We say he wrote the first philosophical commentary to the Book of Changes. So a lot of the discussion in terms of the Taoist concept of Wu, which is translated as non-being or nothingness, this is actually the topic that I tend to focus upon. It's because of Wang Bi that we have the beginning of this so-called Chinese metaphysics, talking of cosmology, ontology, in terms of being, non-being, duality. So he wrote a prefatory essay to the Book of Changes. He calls in English the General Remarks, within which there are a number of claims about images that not only are relevant to the I Ching, because that's the text he's writing about, but also to the other two primary texts of Taoist philosophy, not Taoist religion, which comes in Wang Bi's time, but he didn't really engage. So the Tao Te Ching, which he mentioned, and then the Daoism, which is the text that I focus on. And I let my colleagues work on the Tao Te Ching. I do the hard text. So these three texts, the I Ching, the Tao Te Ching, and the Daoism, in Chinese are called the Sanxuan. Sanxuan meaning the three mysteries, right, or the three dark texts, the three profundities, if you like. Why? Because these three texts are notoriously hard to understand for people who are not familiar with the Taoist tradition. But together they are responsible for the development of Chinese metaphysics, if you want to apply such a label. So in this general remarks essay, we see Wang Bi making statements such as being is governed by non-being. Here I'm using the Western philosophical translations for the Chinese terms yo and wu. So literally, yo means something is present, something is existent, and it doesn't necessarily mean ontology in the Western sense. The Chinese didn't have such a notion until modern times. Non-being, as I mentioned, the translation of wu, or in Japanese, ni. I think that's how you say that. So we can say as not present, or absent, or nothingness, however you want to understand the term. Wang Bi also speaks of the idea that the many, in Chinese, Wang Wu, myriad things, right? All things are governed by oneness, yi, unity. Now, this is not the monism of Spinoza or the one we see in Greek thought, because we have multiplicity within singularity, within unity. And this is a key concept in Taoist thought. Action is governed by stillness. Change is inevitable. You cannot outrun it. You cannot stop it. So you have to accept it. On and on and on and on. So these are some of the key concepts that we see Wang Bi develop and elaborate upon, and are relevant in cinema studies or discussing cinema. Can we use these terms to understand film in a different way? So how are they related to images? Wang Bi, he has a passage from this general remarks essay. I think it's quite relevant in talking about film, at least as I approach it. He says, images are the means to express ideas. Words are the means to explain images. This is a very famous passage. To yield up ideas completely, there is nothing better than images. To yield up the meaning of images, there is nothing better than words. Words are generated by images, so one ponders words to observe images. Images are generated by ideas or meaning, depending how you translate the Chinese word for yi. So one ponders images to observe ideas. Ideas are yielded up completely by images, thus images are made explicit by words. So we have three concepts: images, meaning, and words, and there's a hierarchy to them. Since words are the means to explain images, once one grasps or obtains images, one can forget the words used to convey them. Since images are the means to concentrate on ideas or meaning, once one gets the ideas, one can forget images. Now this is related, of course, to the Book of Changes, to the I Ching. Those of you who don't know what the I Ching is, it's comprised of 64 hexagrams. Here I just give you 4. And they are made up of 6 lines, 2 pairs of 3 lines. Lines that are broken are yin, female lines, and all the attributes associated with that. Solid lines are yang lines, so-called male lines, and all the attributes. So change. You start from the bottommost line, and that's the line that you are drawing when you're doing your divination. Your line will move up. So from the lowest most position, you work your way to the highest most position, and then you are booted out, because all the lines are moving up, and you go back to the lowest one. So using the combination of yin and yang lines, broken and solid lines, you can predict what is going to unfold in the future. And this is relevant for any aspect of daily life. What you do today does have, not in a fatalistic, predeterministic sense, but it does have repercussions for what will happen tomorrow, or in 1 month, or in 1 year. So this is something that Daoism is quite happy to draw our attention towards. In an essay that is appended to the text, one of so-called 10 Wings, reputedly written by Confucius, this is questionable, we read the following. Those with regular tendencies gather according to kind, things divide according to group. In heaven, this process creates images. The sun, the moon, and stars. On earth, it creates physical forms, living things. This is how change and transformation manifests itself. As light, things on earth, and dark, things up in heaven, which also have the potential to illuminate things on earth. So this dynamic interplay between so-called celestial light, because we are talking antiquity in China, so there's no telescopes, there's no advanced means of observation. It's simply using your eyes to observe natural phenomena. Between celestial light, terrestrial forms, for me, this is the first kind of naturalistic cinema, the first kind of film, if you like. Going from this, I then went into an area that I had not explored before, the thought of a French thinker, Gilles Deleuze. And he has written 2 books on cinema. Cinema 1, Cinema 2, I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. I hadn't heard of them before I was preparing this paper, so I'm glad that I read them. Very interesting. Anyways, in volume 1, he says this: the set of movements, of actions and reactions is light, which diffuses, which is propagated without resistance, without loss. The identity of the image and movement stems from the identity of matter and light. The image is movement, just as matter is light. Now, if you don't know these 2 books of Deleuze, he's actually writing a kind of commentary to the thought of another French thinker, Henri Bergson. And Bergson is well known for his philosophy of motion and light and temporality. So Deleuze is writing on that. So why am I quoting this? Well, it kind of connects to what we found in the I Ching, in terms of light and dark, and then the Daoist ideas of stillness and movement and so on. But if you don't know either Daoism or Deleuze, you would not really connect the 2 together. A few pages later, Deleuze says, the image reflected by a living image, i.e. us, is precisely what will be called perception. And again, he is commenting on Bergson. These 2 aspects are strictly complementary. The special image, the living image, is indissolubly the center of indetermination, or the black screen. So unless there is light shining upon us, we are essentially invisible to the world. The Chinese also would say, yeah, if there was no sunlight, if there was no moonlight, then what illuminates us? If we are standing still, we don't move, how do you distinguish our form against a bright background? So we need to have motion in order to separate different kinds of illuminated objects. So what makes the cinematic image different from photography or painting, this is me asking, is not its use of light and color, but motion. If we move through time and space, the fluidity of cinematic images allows them to surpass other art forms, such as photography, painting, even sculpture. Yet their dependency on motion is precisely what prevents them from transcending the physicality of their medium. So this was the starting point for my thought process. How can film step outside of its own, you call the negative, the cellulose medium? Because photography and painting, they are also bound to their canvas, yeah? Film, does it have a canvas? So this is what I will move on to talk about. If we deny the cinematic image of its movement, then it simply becomes pictorial. And the Chinese were known to say, if paintings lack spiritual vitality, 精神 or 精气, kind of infused sense of breath, then they are simply dead images. They're simply maps. And this particularly applies to landscape painting. There needs to be an inherent sense of movement in the painting to make it something other than simply a map, an outline of a scene. So is cinema the same or is cinema different? Now I use the word pictorial, one, because I'm ignorant of all of your vocabularies, because films are not directly created by a filmmaker, but like photography, are bodies of light captured by a machine. We are being recorded right now, but the machine that is filming me and the projector that is projecting my PPT, it's not a living thing, is it? So, unlike painting, for example, where the artist is manipulating by hand, bodily manipulation, paint, using the brush and so on, film can't really do the same thing, can it? So what the filmmaker perceives is not perceived by the equipment, by the camera. For what the camera lacks is, as I just said, a vitality of spirit. Now the director, the producer, or whatever the person who is making the film, they have a sense of spirituality. They have a spiritual vision of what they want to produce. But the technology, at this point in human time, maybe in the future, cameras will be infused with AI, they'll be living robotic, whatever, and they can film and do on, but at this point in time, they can't. So the technology is reliant upon us to point it and to do things to it. And for me, this is a key difference, as I said, from painting, or from sculpture. So film, photography, and painting may succeed in, this is a fancy word for similitude, it just means lifelike, or realistic resemblance. This is something that the Chinese talk about in their writings on landscape painting. Unless they are able to connect with viewers beyond pure sensory experience, they will appear dead. So I've just mentioned that. Now this limitation is not the fault of the artist, but the machine, the technology. What is more, visual arts, being light-dependent means of expression, cannot compare, for example, to music or to sculpture when it comes time to encounter darkness. This is another important, for me, differentiation between film and other modes of either plastic or visual arts. Music, dance as well. So the dark plays a vital role in the world, but it's overlooked by many people. And this is something that Daoism can address. But before I get to that, back to Deleuze for a few more quotations. So he says, light no longer has to do with darkness, but with the transparent, the translucent, or the white. Now, if this were a philosophy conference, I can go and talk about Wittgenstein and his talk of transparency and all that, but I won't do that. So here he is talking about a specific filmmaker. I forgot his name. It's in the book. He's a Russian filmmaker who doesn't work with contrasting shadow and darkness with light, but different shades of light, right? The opacity, the transparency, translucency of light. Very interesting. So he says there's an infinite number of degrees of cloudiness. And then next page, Deleuze says, darkness does not exist by itself, but merely marks the place where light stops. Daoism would say, no, sorry. Shadow is not a mixture, but merely a result, a consequence that cannot be separated from its presence, from its premises, sorry. So again, Daoism would disagree with that. Light gathers to create an image. An image is composed of reflections from other images. And so this is the living image. We need to be illuminated in order not to simply be a black screen. Now, because I teach Chinese philosophy, including certain schools of Buddhism, I immediately had the analogy of Indra's net come to mind. If we are living bodies and we are simply reflecting each other's light in order to be seen, how is this different from Indra's net? I don't know if you are familiar with this. Basically, the image is you have a spider's web, and in the very center there is a large diamond. The Indians like their jewels, so you have a large diamond. Why a diamond instead of a ruby or whatever? Because it is transparent. It's translucent. So you can see through it, it reflects light. And at every node in the spider's web, you have smaller diamonds. So essentially, you have diamonds reflecting diamonds. So long as there are light, they can do that. This is a metaphor for the illusory nature of reality. Everything is empty. Everything is a reflection of something else. Yeah? Once you turn the light off, though, the diamonds can't reflect each other. They disappear. So how is this different from film, from cinematic images? If we turn off the lights, including that of the projector, what happens to the cinematic image? It disappears. It vanishes. So is this evidence that film is illusory? It is empty? It's not real, like substance, because it is dependent on the projection of light? Or is that not the case? So darkness may conceal the diamonds in Indra's net, or it may conceal us. If we stand in the shadow and I'm moving, you can't see me, right? But diamonds, even if there is no light that allows them to reflect other diamonds, they still exist in darkness. Still there. So they are physical objects. But as I mentioned, cinema, you can't have a completely dark movie, can you? What is there to see? How can you see if it's just pure darkness? So maybe somebody has done that and made a creative interpretation of different kinds of darkness. I don't know. I've not seen every movie that has been ever produced. You're the experts, you tell me. But for me, this is an issue. This is a limitation. So visual arts, regardless of how internally bright their scenes are, they require an external lighting in order to be known. The darker the scene, the darker the external lighting must be. So if this room was brightly lit, as if it were daylight, you would not be able to see the words on the screen. So we need to darken the environment in order to reveal the light that is this picture. But internal luminosity of cinematic images is tied to the machine projecting them, creating them. So I produce a movie, I create a movie, but the movie isn't free in the world. It's still dependent upon a machine to animate it, to give it life. So external dependency differs from what we find in painting or in photography. The photographic image, the painting, still persists in the world in a completely dark room. But movies can't do that, can they? I can still touch a painting, touch a photograph, and if it's a painting done in, say, oil, you have touch sensation, right? And with enough encounters with that, you tend to know the whole scene simply by touch. This is something that the German philosopher, who I will mention briefly at the end of the talk, he gets into. Touch as an extension of sight. This is very interesting. So painting for Western art is internal, especially portraiture. The person's face is internally lit, especially the eyes. This is something Hegel talked about. This is something Baumgarten and other people who write on aesthetics. So you have an internal sense of spirit that shines outward through the eyes. This is very different from Chinese art. So we can say painting, portraiture, self-illuminated. But for Daoism, self-illumination begins with darkness. Naturally brightens before it then returns to darkness. So why I began with quoting the Book of Changes, because we have the codependency of light and dark, of existence and non-existence, of motion and rest. So all the supposed, in Western thought, negatives, stillness, emptiness, quietude, darkness, yeah? In Daoism, they're all positives. Because these are the states to which all animate things return. So I stop talking, I return to a state of silence. If I stop moving, then it's a state of stillness. So contra Deleuze's remark that darkness does not exist by itself, Daoism argues that light emerges from an ever-present darkness. Now, the word for mystery in Chinese, xuan, why does it mean mysterious or mystery? Because the original meaning actually is a deep red, a black red. Not this nice red, but a red that is almost black. This is xuan. So it's hard to distinguish the red from the black. There's an obscurity there. It's like at dusk. The sun is set and things start to get a bit blurry, hazy. It's really hard to distinguish objects. Yeah, this is the way Daoists characterize the Dao, as mysterious, as unknowable, because there are always elements to it beyond our ability to see. So, in the Daoist text, the Zhuangzi, we read the following: "The bright and the shining is born out of deep darkness." So we want, in philosophy, we always need to provide textual support, textual evidence for our arguments. There you go. Why darkness is the root of lightness? Well, the text says so. Who am I to argue with him? Zhuangzi lived in the 4th century BC, by the way, a little bit after Lao Tzu. The ordered is born out of formless. So what is formed, what has physical form, comes from what is without form. Pure spirit is born out of Dao. Now, Kiki mentioned she's a fan of Dao De Jing, so I'll quote from Dao De Jing. "The Dao's rising casts no light, its setting occasions no dark. On and on it goes, without name, always reverting to nothingness, non-being, non-existence. It's known as the shape that has no shape, the image that has no form. It's called the dim and the dark." So these are other adjectives to describe the mysterious. The image that has no form. So Wang Bi talks about this in his commentaries, but Lao Tzu is the one to have invented this expression. Film has form. Sculpture has form. Painting has form. But the originator of its formed state is the formless. It's an idea in the mind of the artist. So darkness in Daoism is key. It is a foundational concept. And it functions, we can say, on two levels, the physical level as well as the metaphorical level. So physically, darkness is synonymous with the apophatic nature of the Tao. Apophatism is something that we have in philosophy and in religion, to speak of something by saying what it is and not. So in Daoism we can do the same, because Tao is nameless, it is formless, it is unknowable. How do you talk about it? You have to say in ways that kind of dance around it. So Daoism would ask the following of the cinematic image: can it lead to a state of equality, of unity, equanimity, that is embodied by the Daoist sage? That's the important thing. If it can't, then it's contributing to what Daoism warns us against, which is dependency upon sensory experience. So Lao-Tzu says 5 colors confuse our eyes, 5 sounds dull our ears. Lots of 5s in Daoism. Zhuangzi says people delight in what they see. Why? Because they're corrupted by color. Do they delight in what we hear? We are corrupted by sound. So we don't understand the source of the color or sound because we fixate on the external manifestation. And in Daoism, this is a problem. So how do we avoid this? Zhuangzi says most people mirror themselves in running water. But if you want to get a true image of yourself, you need to look at water that is still. Pure reflection can only be given by what is still. So what is still brings stillness to other things. What is moving brings further motion, agitation, to other things. Now, which of these does cinema do? Does it still us or does it agitate us? And then how do we address the need to embody the other? So if we classify cinematic images in a Daoist sense, or if you want to be trendy, a Bruce Lee, be like water, which is all from Lao-Tzu, then we need to find what is the true reflection. What is the true image? Is it the image on the negative of the film, the projected image, or is it something that is behind the image, something concealed between images, something that is unconveyable, right? Because of the limitation of the medium. Also, because cinema, once it is made, developed, created, it becomes fixed in form. But Daoism is about ceaseless change and adapting to change. So if we are to take cinema as a true indicator of reality, we have a problem. Because it's simply presenting reality in one particular fixed moment in time and space. And it cannot embody what is prior, and it cannot include what is proceeding. So it's not the true all-encompassing image. Now, I mentioned a German thinker that I would like to touch upon, who wrote a famous book dealing with sculpture. His name is Johann Herder. So his book, the title there, he says the following: what sculpture should create, what it has succeeded in creating, are forms in which the living soul, and this is very important for philosophers in his time, how the soul animates the entire body, forms in which art can compete in the task of representing the embodied soul. So why is that important? Why the soul should be the one animating from within forms, instead of depending upon an external source of animation. In the case of cinema, that would be the projector. So there is a story in the Zhuangzi of a sculptor, a carver of wooden bell stands. I won't include it, but he uses a very interesting Chinese term, which is xiao, and this is the original word for to sculpt. In Chinese, it means to pare away, to scrape off. This is what sculpture is: paring off, carving away material, layer by layer. Now, this is very different from film, which is not a paring away, but it's a building up. You're combining different scenes, adding sound, adding CGI or whatever, to create the final image. So which of the two, sculpture or cinema, is able to capture the essence of a visual experience? Sculpture, for me at least, because it stands free in the world, it's not dependent upon external self-revealing sources of light. It marks a kind of free being. This is something Heidegger talked about, Herder talked about, others. Daoism talks about that as well. So we can encounter a sculpture on our own terms. Doesn't matter how old we are, background, weather, anything. The sculpture is there, it's in the world, it subjects itself to natural changes in a way that cinema cannot. Sculpture also creates a sense of space, a sense of place around it. So there is an invitingness, an invitation to come and sit with it and see the world from its point of view. Can cinema do this? This is the question that I pose to all of you. So, very, very briefly, Herder says this: a statue does not stand in light, it creates its own light. A statue is not placed in space, it creates its own space. Consequently, it should not be compared in this respect with painting, which for Herder is simply creating a three-dimensional image, but you're essentially limited to two planes because it's flat. Painting depicts everything from a single point of view, does so on a surface, on a panel of light, on something that is given, and that can be taken in all at once. In a single glance, you can see an image. You can't do that with a sculpture. But you can do that with film. You just sit there and you look and you see it all in one glance. Sculpture doesn't possess a viewpoint, it explores everything in the dark, following the shape of limbs and forms. So he's talking about a sculpture of human form. So let me conclude with the following. The cinematic image, film, it's an important outlet for human imagination. I acknowledge that. It becomes ever more real, convincing, as technology progresses. You think back 10 years ago, before there was 3D in those days, but we have to wear these silly glasses. I mean, today you can be completely fooled by CGI and everything. But for me, cinema cannot be an ontological entity on its own. Precisely for the reason that I gave for sculpture. Sculpture is free in the world. Cinema is not. So if we want to learn something about ourselves, about human nature, for me, it's better to do so with sculpture than with cinema. It's better to do so with music than with painting. It's better to do so with poetry than photography. Because these are things that you can carry with you as you live your life. You can return to. And as you age and your life priorities change, so does your understanding of that thing. But for me, cinema, there's something inherently prohibitive about that. So the question that I pose, can cinematic images exist in the world? I think as a scholar of Chinese philosophy, my answer would be no. But I look forward to hearing all of your questions and rebuttals as to why it should be yes. So thank you very much.
Who's first?
Ladies first.
You're first. Yes.
Spirit of Daoism.
Thank you. This is a very fascinating talk. I can understand why you're doing sculpture and doing Daoism because 有名无名, you can sing and shen, you can do a lot of things. I think I might first give a suggestion. When you're doing Daoism, probably it's better, bring out the original texts. It would be better for us to understand it. And sometimes, the translation gave a little bit, vague and things in it. So in your page number 9, for example, for this 道德经 chapter 14, yes. I think the original version is I'm not sure I can understand. It mentions dark in it. It means 明明不可明.
Yeah.
And
But Ming.
明明是不可明.
Yeah, Ming also it means dark or profound, obscure. This is Richard Lin's translation, not mine.
Okay. Well, what I would like to say is in this original text, 明明是不可明，复归于物，是谓无状之状，无相之无物之相，是谓恍惚。And for 恍惚, I would probably understand it as, you know, an abstract or vague rather than understand in darkness. This is just one of the suggestion. Probably the original would bring more understanding. And my question is actually, you mentioned a lot of Deleuze in it, so I would like to know your understanding of introducing or interpreting Daoism by Western philosophers, and what's your opinion?
I do a lot of comparative philosophy. One of the difficult things in doing comparative philosophy is to be faithful to both thinkers, both texts, whatever, if you're doing more than one text. So I can't just randomly choose two people and compare them. That's very superficial. So to do meaningful comparative study, you need to find a common ground, common vocabulary. Yes, their understanding, their interpretation is different. This is to be expected. But if the objective is to explain, to elucidate a particular idea, then you can take that as a starting point to say, okay, Deleuze says this about darkness, Daoism says that about darkness. If we bring them together into conversation, can we find a middle ground? Not to say Deleuze is right, Daoism is wrong, or vice versa. This should not be the objective of comparative philosophy. This is the way we used to do it in the past. But if we are doing, especially if it's intercultural philosophy, you need to be very careful not to distort the cultural context of the concept. So darkness for Deleuze is literal darkness. And in Daoism, it can be literal, but as I said, it's also metaphorical. So Daoism speaks of people being inwardly dark. If you are inwardly dark, what does that mean? Well, it's a metaphor for ignorance. You are lacking knowledge of the Tao. You are in a state of darkness. What does darkness mean? How do you elaborate? Well, it can be explained as confusion, as other big words, befuddlement, disoriented, so on and so on. So there are many descriptives of darkness in the Taoist texts. Some apply to the Tao, some are cosmological, others are applying to human experience. Lack of awareness, blindness, confusion, ignorance, selfishness, right? You were simply following your desires instead of living naturally in harmony with the Tao. So they would say you are in a state of darkness, right? Of disorder, kind of 乱, which is akin to confusion. So because I am talking about cinema, I can then bring in Deleuze and bring in Daoism in terms of their discourse on light and dark, because this is essentially what cinema is trying to do, trying to highlight shadows, trying to conceal other things. So this interplay, this is very dynamic. It's very Daoist. In cinema, you can do it in a way where they conjoin, they're very harmonious, but you can do it in a very conflicting, jarring way. Which way you follow determines how you encounter that particular thing, that movie. It's too bright, you cover your eyes, I don't like it, right? It bothers me. It's too dark, I can't really see clear, I don't like it. So it really depends upon, in the moment that you are experiencing the thing, how is it that you are perceiving it? Daoism would say, well, you are constantly fluid in your perception. Don't feel that the way you see it today is going to be the same way you see it in the future. No, it will not be, because things are changing within you. Physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, you cannot say, I have one fixed and unchanging way of doing anything in life, including the way you use knowledge, you acquire knowledge. So I just found it very, very interesting that for Deleuze, he's drawing upon the ideas of Bergson to explain how lightness is then related to temporality, to spatiality, in terms of the cinematic image. And then I can use Daoism to say, well, hold on a minute. If we are talking the Tao is a constant Tao, is a Chang Tao, but is a formless, nameless, unknowable constancy, then what is the significance of that in the way we experience visual art?
But
So you become attached to a particular interpretation of an art. And Daoism will say that that's problematic, that's wrong. Right? Because you are not the artist, and even the artist is limited in producing a final form, but as an artist, we, or as a philosopher or whatever, we always want to change it. But once it's there in its fixed form, we can't change it unless we do second edition, third edition, right? We revise. This is the problem. So in film, you're editing, you're going through many versions, and then the producer or whoever says, yeah, this is the one that I want. But we as viewers, do we agree? Do we disagree? Maybe, maybe not.
Thank you for your question. And this is really good opening up a discussion of what we will have at the end of today's session, the roundtable. We'll discuss more of the methodologies involved in comparative philosophy, comparative film philosophy. And we also have this lady and you at the back, and perhaps some others. So we'll start with you.
Yes. Hi. Thanks very much for your talk. It's very, very interesting. So just a little bit about my background. I'm an artist, sort of computational artist, but I'm also interested in VR and XR as kind of media which I use.
What is XR?
XR is like it just describes things like augmented reality and virtual reality and other forms of other cinematic forms.
Right.
Okay. So if you have something like, I disagree with you.
That's good.
With regard to the ontological status of cinema, right? Because obviously with cinema, it doesn't just exist as a fixed image, right? Yeah. It also exists in your memory and your experience of it. Okay, so even though the editor has like a particular final form for their work of art, their cinematic piece, that doesn't mean that you don't have your own interpretation and experience of it, right? Which means that ontologically it does have some kind of form, existence, right? Also, if you look at things like 3D cinema and VR, this is not the same as sculpture, but you can exist within it and you can walk around it, so to speak. So that's just a little provocation. Yeah.
But this is the at least from what I know of VR and AR and whatever other R's that are coming, there is the real danger of getting lost in that illusionary world from which you cannot return. This is a great fear. Maybe this is just science fiction movies saying this. But when it gets to the point where you cannot distinguish a virtual reality from true reality, then you get into a whole set of ethical questions, and it becomes potentially very dangerous, because then you are not only distorting people's minds, but you are corrupting the ability to free think and to experience in the way that is natural for you. What I mean by is, if this room is like, use a Star Trek analogy, is a holodeck, yeah. So it's just a projected image. All of you don't exist. You're part of a computer program. So it's like the Matrix. And I take it as real. And then I formulate judgments about the world and about myself based on this experience. And then you turn off the lights and everything goes away. I have a sense of loss, right? And then I develop a sense of longing for this false reality. And then I forget, I essentially lose what it means to be a human being. Right? I lose the Tao. The Tao is the thing that guides me through life. Why? Because the Tao is the non-thing that has given me this bodily form with these innate inborn abilities. AI can't do that, can it? It can fool me into thinking I can fly and I have all these other superhuman things. But if I go back to the time when I'm an infant, a child, before I have been taught language and concepts, moral norms, concepts of right and wrong, I am living a purely natural life. Everything is curious. Everything is new. I don't know what is fearful, what is comforting. But I know because I have a bodily, spiritual sense that is innate to me. It's natural to me. Cinema tries, at least for me, very, very hard to supplement that, or in some cases to replace that. But then the problem is, if I lose my self-awareness, my sense of belonging in the world, the consequence is, what does life end up meaning then? If we are born to live the life that we have been given, and I'm not speaking in theological or mystical terms, right? We've survived the miracle of birth. We've been given this form that has a fixed lifespan, certain abilities, right? We can't change the body that we have, so we need to make most of this and what we can do with that. But if suddenly I can somehow have an out-of-body experience, in a Buddhist sense, how do I find my way back to my body and know that my body is real? We have a passage in the Daoism where he's dreaming he's a butterfly. Very famous story. He wakes up, and then he no longer is able to know, is he now in this wakened state, is he Daoism, who dreamt he was a butterfly? Or is he a butterfly who is dreaming that he is now Daoism? How do you distinguish? 4th century BC, Daoism was asking this question. The answer is, well, you cannot know the difference. But if you obsess over the question, what is real, dream state versus woken state, you're asking the wrong question. You're pursuing the wrong answer. Right? It shouldn't make a difference whether you're a butterfly or a human. You live the life that you've been given, and that's it. And try to not do things that will harm your life or shorten your life. This is the goal of Daoism, to live a long, healthy life.
Thank you, David. I think we have a question from Rob and Piotr. Yeah, and we are running a little bit late, so can you please keep
You can grab me during lunch or after lunch.
Yeah, well, I can see many other people wanting to ask questions. Yeah, we have a whole day to discuss. So, question from Rob and Piotr. Can you keep your question? And
I'll keep my answer brief.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try, but I mean, I think that was a tremendous paper, David. Really fascinating, but also very challenging. And I'm speaking as one of the film people up here in the dark. And you've invited a defense.
Yes, I'm in the light, I'm exposing.
Okay. You've really shaken some of my ideas, and I'm going to try and respond. It's about this idea that you seem to be defining the film as the image. If you deny cinematic images their movement, then it stops being cinema.
Yep.
So they become photographs, and we literally call them stills.
Yes.
Now, vice versa, if we flick through still images, say 24 images a second,
Yep.
then we have we get a film through the perception of movement. So meaning is not in the image itself, but it's in flow and it's in juxtaposition. And it's the flow and the juxtaposition that contextualizes the image. The art of cinema is not the image. The art of cinema is the editing. Now, if you go back to Bergson, he famously talks about if you stick a pin in a butterfly to study it, we have no chance because we've removed life from the butterfly. We have no sense of the process. of flow and juxtaposition from caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly. And therefore you have to let it flow. And I think this also relates to filmmaking terminology. You were talking about editing, but of course there's an essential dialectic there between to edit, which is the word we use in English, which means to reduce something, to make it smaller, and the word montage, which is to add things and make things bigger.
Yep.
Now that's an essential dialectic of filmmaking. And I would say that because of that, I think the element of juxtaposition might possibly be missing from your enthusiasm for stopping the film and then just looking at the still that's left on screen. So, as I say, you have to let it flow. Now, in those terms, I'm getting to a question, there can never really be a wholly dark film or a wholly dark image because it's juxtaposition with films or images that are darker or lighter that give meaning. So I think my question is, doesn't the still dark image still gain or have meaning by juxtaposition? And isn't that the essential dialectic of the meaning of the art of film?
Well, from the Daoist point of view, a dark image is no longer an image. It's a non-image. What I call a non-image is in Chinese 无相, right? So it's not to say we are negating the image. It ceases to exist. It's there, but it returns back to its how to say, ancestral state, if you like, to use a very Chinese way of thinking. The progenitor, right? The root, the source of images is its complementary other. I don't want to use opposite. We don't speak of opposites in Daoism, which is non-image, or no image, an imagelessness, if you like. Why? Because what is dark is then in a state of holistic existence with everything. Once you illuminate it, you give it a sense of lightness, you give it a sense of being, you give it a sense of purpose. What you're doing then is you are distinguishing it from its collectivity as a formless, dark unity. You are putting a spotlight on it and you're saying, hey, look at this. And when you fixate on that, you forget everything that is around it and everything that came before this thing emerges in the light. And for Daoism, this is problematic. And this is a lot of their questioning the use of knowledge and language. We have words, we use words, we focus on words, but we don't appreciate the meaning that gives rise to words. And we even forget the image in the mind that gives rise to the meaning that gives rise to the word. So Daoism is always about reverting as far back in time and space as possible to the singular source of all things, of reality itself, the Tao. So the non-image, which becomes mysterious, is the image that is hidden, it is concealed, it is profound, it is mysterious, this is good. This means it is not doing all the other things, distinguishing itself, illuminating itself, highlighting itself, making itself known to the world, because as soon as something does that, then the world will put trouble onto that thing. So why, when Daoism speaks of the sagely person, sagacious person, the Genren, or whatever you want to call them, they are always described in these negative terms, as hidden, as concealed, as mysterious, as dark, as unknowing, so on and so on. That's how they are able to weave amongst the things in the world and not be obstructed by them. So the non-image is the true image because the non-image includes all images. It is the infinite possibility for any image to emerge out of it. But images can't do that because an image is fixed. This is why we call it an image. It's limited by its name, by its purpose, in being a particular image as opposed to all the other images. Otherwise, how do we talk about them? So film, yes, stringing together a series of images to produce a film. If you focus on one image within a film, you can't say that is the whole film. Unless we get to the technology like the Chinese have, where they have micro painting within little snuff jars, a whole scene painted within a square centimeter. Unless cinema is able to somehow do that, one image contains all the other images of the film, and it simply depends upon your perspective, which image you see and its relation to all the other ones, in a kind of Indra's net analogy. I don't see how a film is able to fulfill the objective that Daoism would ask of it, which is to embody all possible images and non-images simultaneously. Otherwise, it's simply a biased, it's a preferential presentation.
Thank you. And one last question for you, and then I'm very glad, this really warmed us up, very provocative question from David, and also I can see people really wanting to respond. Keep us alert for a whole day. One last question, keep your question simple, and please also keep your answer simple. And then
We philosophers like to talk, so I'm sorry for that.
I'll try to keep it
okay.
weekend.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I found it super interesting. Like in my head, many things to discuss. And I cannot really disagree with you on your conclusion if I think about film as a set of images. I think often it's forgotten that like between the idea and the final images or the product that we create as a film, there's a long set of relations that are the process of creation of the film. It can last many years as well, and also the meaningful relations that you build during the process are something that we can also find. That's something that I use to qualify the success of a film. Like this, during the process, you are actually able to create a meaningful set of relations. And so I want to try to turn it into a little provocation towards sculpture. If there was some sort of an apocalypse and we couldn't screen films anymore, and because we don't have access to projectors or screens anymore, you can still count on the heritage of this set of relations that has been created during the film. But if you destroy the sculpture, what remains of it? What else do you have? Is the process behind the sculpture creation?
Well, very briefly, Daoism would say all of nature is a sculpture. We are sculptures. As we live life, we are creating spaces and marking our places in the world, which we then give a sense of autonomy or authority to, which of course doesn't exist in nature. You can't claim space as your own or a place as your own. You can occupy it temporarily, but you can't say this is mine. So the using the analogy of sculpture is to draw attention to the fact that, well, if we look at the sun and the moon and the stars as a naturalistic cinematic image, they are in some way sculpting space. Now, we are so far away we can't see the three-dimensionality of it, but they are constantly moving, they are constantly changing. The relationship that things have to them is creating a kind of dynamics, which is in a sense sculptural. So physical sculpture, yes, you can destroy it, it ceases to be, just as with any other visual art, even music or whatnot. But what the Taoists want to draw attention to is the fact that the Tao sculpts all things, including humans. And we forget that. We think, okay, this is my body, that I'm born, I reach maturity, the body is fixed, nothing's going to happen, it's not going to change. But in 40 years when you're old, your sculpture has, you're now like that. Okay? You're all wrinkly and whatever. So as a living sculpture, this is different from a fixed sculpture. Yes, and I think cinema is sculptural in a sense, but it's even more limiting because I can't get into the film and wander around. I can use my imagination, like with photography, like with painting. Yeah? And there are good films that do that are very spiritually touching, yes. So I'm not saying all cinema fails, but the majority of mainstream movies is just simply entertainment. Right? The goal is simply to make money. And it's not necessarily an expression of the artist's self-creativity or ontological relationship to the world. There are those, yes. Those are the ones that really touch us and move us and want to do good in the world, but the majority don't. Same with sculpture. There's many ugly and just terrible sculptures. But if you view nature, a tree, or a mountain, or anything, you view it as a sculptural entity, then there's a sense of inviting to that, right? It welcomes you in without any expectation, and you leave as you wish, and you can return as much as you want, you can bring others as much as you want, so long as you do not physically harm the sculpture. You let it be as it is, because then you can identify with that. But as soon as you try to alter it to fit your image, it's no longer the sculpture as it was originally created. And I think a lot of bad films are trying to do that. They're trying to say, this is wrong, this is right, this is the way we should be viewing the world. Daoism would say, well, that's simply the perspective of the producer. And we should not take it as dogma, as representing all people. You can't do that. The only thing Daoism says that is able to include all points of view is the Tao, because it is not a thing that is knowable. It's not a bodily, nameable, fixed thing.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We can say more.
Yeah, I do have one more provocative response to you. I do not expect your answer for now, because we're not time.
Yep.
But you compare film with sculpture. But what's really in my mind is music. Music can also argue is ontologically not exist. You request instrument, whatever it is, to appear. And once it's finished, it's also linear. Once it's finished, it's done. So yeah, these two forms perhaps have more similarity to compare, but not response for you.
Okay.
From you for now, because we ran out of time. We're
Yes,
10 minutes behind the schedule, but I think 10 minutes is perfect timing. Without you, let's welcome our next stop. Well, thank you very much, David. Thank you. That's a really fascinating and very philosophical, deep question that we will be thinking for the rest of the day.
And Kiki will say more in